Friends, good evening. We are starting our fourth session out of 5. Today's topic is dedicated to the idea of pluralism and diversity in the evolution of Judaism. And it will serve us right to start our topic by revisiting what I told you on our first session, if you remember, when we made a distinction which I told you is going to follow us as we progress between philosophy, theology, and religion. Do you remember that distinction? Yes. Is there anyone who would be willing to repeat it in their own 2 words? Do not be afraid. Nothing to, no exam at the end. It gives you a chance to be live on YouTube through iScene. I mean, go for it.
Did you say you wanted us to describe what is theology, religion, and philosophy, theology, and religion, yeah?
Yeah, the distinction that we made.
So the distinction that you made in a nutshell,
yes, in a nutshell,
was that philosophy concerned itself with the essence, with the existence of God, the Havaya of God.
Right, with the essential.
Theology asks the question why, and religion asks the question how. So religion tries to merge or respond, give a practical response to the theological tenets and the philosophical tenets.
Fantastic. Beautiful. I did something right. Now I know that I did something I did right.
I'll repeat your lesson, my friends, and I remember that.
Very, very good summary. Very articulate. Good. So what we said basically is we said that based on a philosophical assumption that is whose subsoil is some essential attributes of divinity, we now postulate the creation of the world as based on a certain ethical backbone, and then we come to ask ourselves, how do we respond to that ethical backbone by reconfiguring our entire way of life? You remember we said religion is a man-made process which basically aims to reshift our modalities of daily living in a way that most adequately responds to that what we perceive as an ethical charge, which is theology. So you put it very well. If you remember, I told you also that if you read the Torah right from the get-go, based on this distinction, it's very easy to recognize the Torah as a theological document rather than a philosophical one, right? It starts right from the get-go with a theological assumption that the world was created for a reason and that that mankind is now charged with something, and that something is usually ethical. Now we come to another point, which brings us closer to the subject matter. And that is the devastatingly ignorant assumption that some modern Jews have that there is a way to encapsulate the Jewish religion. Now I'm talking about the religious aspect of Jewish life. And that there is a right path of what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And by the way, the word orthodox means the right path. Right? In case you didn't know. And I'm here, and I may be putting my life on a limb because now I'm being broadcasted all over the place with this. I'm here to tell you, and I mentioned that before already, that there hasn't been a moment in Jewish life where there was a consensus about the trajectory of Judaism. Anybody who tells you otherwise, and you are welcome to quote me on that, is either a liar or tries to sell you something. The second point I made was that if you actually follow the evolution of Jewish intellectual history, you find that more important than articulating the right answers was the ability to articulate the questions intelligibly, each generation anew. In other words, to create a platform or a subsoil wherein each generation perceives the existential questions, the halachic questions that bother or concern Judaism, relevant. The problem we have today is no different than the problem we had 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and 1,000 years ago. Rabbis were not angry at other Jews who disagreed with them. They were petrified by those Jews who decided to remain silent. The greatest problem we have to the evolution of Jewish life is not disagreement, but indifference. That's the real threat. Those who don't care. Well, remember, those who argue with you still care. That's a great virtue, not to be taken lightly. However, there are those within every system who would like to present their religion or their religious interpretation in a very dogmatic fashion. They will try to tell you that their religion is the one that most adequately corresponds or reflects the mind of God. There will be those who will tell you that their way of doing things are in fact what God wants you to do. Now, my friends, I'm taking you back to what we talked about last week when I showed you the difference between absolute truth and applicable truth. And if you remember that incredible passage that says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim, these and these are the words of the living God, there is no absolute truth when it comes to halacha, but rather applicable truth. Applicable truth deals with religion. And religion, and this is where I want us to go, religion by definition is a limited manifestation of a limited mind. When we talk about the human response to the mind of God, we're talking about a response which is inherently inadequate. This is why there are so many religious figures who would love to know what God wants, because it will put them out of their human misery of living perpetually in the dark. I'll give you an example. Yedid Nefesh. Familiar with that homily? The Yedid Nefesh was written by Azkari in the 16th century, a friend and a colleague of Rabbi Shlomo El-Kabetz, who wrote Lecha Dodi. Same time, same city. Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman. Have you heard it before? It's a beautiful one, right? Beautiful. If you listen to the words, Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman Meshoch Avdecha El Retzoncha. I'll translate loosely. Beloved of the soul, O merciful Father, draw thy servant to your will, or to thy will. In modern language, beam me up, Scotty. Basically, what Azkari asks here is the question or the request of a religious figure to have some sort of theological transparency. Tell me what you want. Draw me closer to your light so I may come back and serve you better. Which, by the way, is the very quintessential notion of Jewish mysticism or any mystical experience. Go up, figure it out, come down, teach others. That's the idea. Mystics don't want to go there and stay there. They want to go there in order to come back and turn this world into a better place. Or the way I like to say, to turn the world in which we live into a world in which we believe. Right? This notion of exacting the divine mind. However, this notion of exacting the divine mind is informed by the perpetual, unchanging, inherent difference between the human mind and the divine mind. The divine mind, at least we assume, is perfect. The human mind, we know, is imperfect. And if there is something that is inherently imperfect, it can never reach the level of perfection that it aspires for. I want you to understand what I just said. There is a no entry zone. There is a disparity which is existential in the human condition in that regard when we talk about the difference between religion and theology. Religion aspires to come as close as possible to the theological charge, all along knowing that this quest is never ending. Now, that paradoxical situation is the very lifeline of the relevance of Torah and religious life. Because if you could assume that you could get it one day, trust me, my friends, there would be a rabbi who would tell you, I got it already. We don't need to pursue further. Even in the world where we know that the human mind is incapable, there are those who come and tell us we got it already. Now you just remain stupid and let us inform you. It's definitely an agenda. The question is, would you allow it? Would you allow it?
It's done every day.
Absolutely. We live in a world where people, especially after 9/11, we live in a world where there's people who will take religious precept and try to sell them as theological truth. It happens every day. Israel is no exception. It happens in all religious systems. Judaism is no exception. And just like we did in the last 3 times, I want to put some order in this chaos.